Well, we are in this stage of, I guess, for those of you online as well. So we've been going through the Lamrim Chenmo. So this is the stages of the path to enlightenment. And this teaching is one that encompasses all of the Buddhist teachings and puts them in a very nice, organized method. So you know where you are on the path. And we've already done the preliminary steps and really thinking about the four thoughts that turn our mind to Dharma, cultivating our precious human life, this opportunity that we have and wanting to make good use of it. And we went through the initial motivation, which is the idea of how to make the best use of this life and set ourselves up for the next one. But more importantly, if we don't believe there's a next one, how do we make good use of the one we have? And how do we cultivate a really strong conviction of what could lead to inner peace and tranquility, either in this life or the next? And again, the emphasis is always on the idea of investigation. Nothing that's said here at any point ever says, this is the way it is, it's written here. It's always about investigation. Well, here's the nature of things. And it's for us to investigate and to see if they work, see if it makes sense, see if it applies. And in that way, we actually cultivate something we can rely upon. Otherwise, blind faith doesn't, really get us very far. It's not going to get us through the really tough times. And it's not very useful. So we don't want that type of faith, and we don't want to just accept things because they're told to us. We want to investigate. This is a path of personal investigation. Ultimately, the Buddha taught how we could see the truth. And so how are you going to find the truth except to investigate what is and how I experience things? And so everything that we enter into in any of these teachings and into our day is always asking the question, what's true? And a basic hypothesis, and what the Buddha says, I always like to say a working hypothesis from like Robina Corton, those of you that have heard her talks, it's a working hypothesis. The Buddha says that all of our suffering, all of our mental afflictions, all of our, and we're not talking about physical pain, just suffering, anger, resentment, jealousy, depression, etc., comes from misperceiving what's happening, from not living in reality. If we lived in reality, those mental states won't arise. I mean, that's the basic foundation. And so everything that he's taught in all these teachings, whether whatever lineage, Zen, Theravada, Tibetan, Vajrayana, it's always going to give us tools to investigate what's true. What's true? I mean, that's what we want to know. What's true? So, wisdom is the ultimate release. And so as we present our teachings, our first initial motivation was really to look at something that we can rely upon, something that we can build faith on, that there's a path, that there's some teachings that make sense, and understanding the way our ethics, our values, and the way that we interact in the world, how that impacts our life. So that we cultivate an ethical life, then you may find that your life is much more peaceful, tranquil, and we have a lot less afflictions, because the definition karmically within Buddhism is a non-virtuous activity results in an unpleasant experience. A virtuous one results in a pleasant one. It's not right and wrong, good or bad. It's just things that I do that cultivate pleasurable results are virtuous. Things I do that create unpleasurable or non-virtuous. Sometimes I use wholesome and unwholesome, beneficial or unbeneficial. Often our mind likes certain words over other words. And so if we start to understand that, and that first one is we start to pay attention to my motivation. Am I doing things in a way that are ethical and meaningful to me? And as a result of that, do I have more peace and tranquility in my life? Does that kind of work out? We'll touch more about the karmic imprints and bok or habits or conditionings and neural pathways. Lots of ways of putting these things. There's a really good article by Alexander Berzin, who's an incredible teacher, and he talked about the three different ways that His Holiness presents Buddhism. One's scientific, one is really psychological, and then one's religious. So there's three aspects that we can really look at. And the real beauty of it is you don't need to have any religious faith to really gain a lot of benefit over, the scientific, empirical, how things work in the world, and psychologically, how can I work with my mind, and then if that works, and there's religious aspects of it, can really infuse our practice as well. But we always want to start where we are, and we always want to investigate this with a very clear, discerning mind, and but not a closed mind. That's something we'll unpack here in a bit with the afflictions. There's a big difference between discerning mind and closed mind. It's that contempt prior to investigation. That's just the way it is. The way it always is. I don't even want to invest. Well, let's look at what's true. And in this type of path, if we really want to remove suffering, if we want to make progress, we want to open the can and see what's inside. We want to explore and challenge and investigate. We want the truth. Dharma, the definition at its ultimate level, is the ultimate nature of reality. That's what it is, Dharma, truth. So we want to know the truth. So let's not be bashful. Let's dive in and see what we find. And so as we progress, we've gone through the things that we should meditate on. These particular teachings in Lamrim, the idea is that we learn something and then we contemplate it. We tear it apart. We talk about it, and then we meditate on it. So we really want to go from a philosophical idea to an actual realization. And the only way you're going to do that, really, is to challenge it, see if it holds up. And if you can't debate it, if it doesn't hold up, it's not going to be a very good realization. So we got the wisdom of the teaching, the wisdom of contemplating the teaching, tearing it apart, talking about it, debating it, and then the wisdom of meditating on it. Once I get that realization, while I bring it into my meditation, I sit with it and just let it infuse my consciousness. And in that way, we can really change our experience of life and bring it into our day-to-day interactions. Not an idea, an interesting thought, or, one of the illustrations of this quite simply is, what was the book? Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Right. And I'll tell you, almost everything we talk about, we've kind of learned in kindergarten. Play well with others, it's better to share, and, happiness is inside, it's not out there. All that stuff that we talk about. Well, we learn it, we talk about it, and it all makes sense, and then we go out and do just the opposite in our daily life. And I really grab on to stuff, and I don't share well with others, and I get prideful, and I get angry, and I get frustrated. But if I were to sit down and talk to someone, oh yeah, no, that's right, I get that. But it doesn't translate into my actual life experience. And so that's really the difference here, is we want it to actually change the way we live our life. And the only way that's going to happen is to take a little time. So here we are for an hour and a half. And it's a small moment of time in our lifetime. But it's an important one, because we can use this. We can use what we have here. We come together as a sangha, as a group, to water the seeds that we want to nurture in our life. Because once we step out that door, it's just so quick to fall right into all of my habits and conditioning and samsaric life. A great illustration of that is, you may have noticed when you meditated, we meditate for a little bit and bring our mind back, and it's struggle, and I'm having these thoughts, and that goes on. When that gong goes off, it's amazing how we instantly relax. The mind's like, hey, I'm back now, enough of that meditation stuff. I got stuff to say, you're not ignoring me now. The party's on. It's as soon as that bell comes off, it's like, oh yeah, that's done. And let's get back to delusion and obsessive and compulsive thinking and, maybe, when's this thing over anyway? I'm looking for dessert. It's such a classic example of how strong our habits and our conditioning, our mind is what we're up against. We're up against this. So we learn this stuff and we read about this stuff and then we go right into old habits and conditioning because it's so strong. And so this is really designed to go at that. So we need to really take some time and notice how that mind is running our lives and how it's creating conditions that are just unsatisfactory in our life. And that's where we're at the teaching now. So the initial scope is really starting to develop a path, something you can rely upon, the ethics, the way of really setting yourself up for what we call the small scope, best use of this life and setting ourselves up for the next life, a continued path. And then at the medium scope, the intermediate inspiration here, motivation, is the idea that now I want to cultivate the desire to be liberated, that I don't need to be a part of this at all, that this is all delusion, it's nonsense, it's suffering, and I don't want any part of that. I want nirvana. I want to obtain liberation. And so how do we do that? Well, we're not going to do that if we think this is pretty good. You're not going to work very hard if your life's pretty cushy. It's just not going to work too well, right? And so if we, people that are here, we tend to know that there are things in our life that just aren't quite comfortable. When are you really comfortable for any extended period of time? And as soon as you get comfortable, does your mind go to what's next? Or how can I make this last? When can we just sit and be comfortable? And is there, the things that we think are really beneficial and comforting, are they in fact really beneficial and comforting? And so we want to investigate that. We want to see, is this true? And if it feels pretty good, it's really not going to be very easy to look for liberation because there's nothing to liberate yourself from, right? If you're feeling pretty good. Life's pretty good. Car's all right. It's a nice day. Live in Carbondale. I'm not going to work very hard on my mental habits and conditioning. So in this case, he says, well, let's examine the nature of your life and notice your mental afflictions. Start noticing. So that's where we were the last couple of weeks, and we hadn't got much further than attachment, had we? It's a very, very powerful affliction. So I'm saying first we have to notice our mental afflictions, and by afflictions here, the definition is in this text here is really about anything that takes our mind out of balance. Okay, peaceful, tranquil, well, it's going to take me out of balance. I'm going to be desirous. I'm going to be a little angry. I'm going to be exaggerated. I'm not going to be really comfortable and peaceful. So a mental affliction is something that's taking my mind out of a peaceful, tranquil balance. And so we can see that happens a lot, I bet. And so we spent a couple weeks now on that first really strong mental affliction of attachment. Attachment, what I get attached to, what I really like, and looked at that the things that we get attached to, the things that we really want in our lives, the things that we really think will bring us happiness and joy, when we look a little further, they're the seeds of all of our suffering and dissatisfaction. I worry about it. I stress about it. I just, I hunger for it. I worry about it. I want to lock it up. I want to preserve it. And the amount of joy, the joy is not in the thing. Right? The joy's here. It's not there. So there's this really weird misperception about the value that we attribute to things. And then, so we spent a lot of time looking at that. And if we start to notice, is there anything outside, out of this grasping sense of lack of self, that's something that's going to really make us happy. Does it exist? So, does it exist? So, we're encouraging people to look. Does that exist? Even a good meal. Even a good meal. I had some really good ice cream yesterday. And it was delicious. It was nice. But my mind will go back to, that ice cream's in the freezer. that taste was good for the moment. Still, it was good for the moment. And then it was gone. And there might be a moment of contentment, but then it changes, and then the mind's looking for something else. Okay, dessert's over. What's going on? What are we gonna do now? And there's nothing out that's ever providing any real sense of lasting happiness. And then we have the affliction of, what if I become lactose intolerant and I can't eat ice cream? Or, can't afford it, or it's not good for me, or, I really want it, it's on my mind. So, that's a simple thing, ice cream. But this plays out on major levels. Job, how about sense of security and job? I was talking to somebody yesterday, they really talked about, getting that real secure job. And I wonder where that is. And so there's this attachment to things in ways that don't exist. And if we look at those attachments, it's really setting us up for being dissatisfied. But if we don't notice it, we're always thinking, well, that's pretty good. I got this cool thing, whether it's the yard, the garden, whatever. So as soon as something doesn't come up right or something doesn't happen. So we spent quite a bit of time. I don't want to rehash all that. And so there's 6 primary afflictions, 6 primary that are taught, and there's like 20 secondary, I believe. And so I just want to go through some of the mental afflictions, but one of them will really address how they arise. And if we notice how they arise, that's the core of these teachings here in this intermediate scope, is noticing the cause of suffering. If you know the cause, you can do something about it. And so the second one that arises that really takes us out of balance is pride. And that's an interesting thing, because we value pride in our culture a lot, right? I'm proud of my 8th grader. I'm proud of, this. We have all these certificates and things we put up on the wall. We really go after that pride, and we gotta have a good sense of self-esteem. And if we investigate that, you're gonna see that's a problem, isn't it? My pride, has just put me in contrast with you and everybody else. And I'm either better than somebody at something, and then how about when somebody challenges our qualifications and my ego gets attacked? And pride at this level really says, I'm better than you at something, right? I'm better than you at something. And it immediately has a me in contrast with you, which is going to be the source of just about every mental affliction we have. And so pride's a real tricky one. And I'm going to overlap it into our next one in a minute. But when we think about pride, think how that separates people. Just in banter, just in, schools. My school's better than your school. Really? Everyone you meet, by the way, is better at something than you. Right? That's one of those sort of basic concepts. Everyone we meet, our teachers, are better at a lot of things than us. I think I told you that joke, or maybe it was the Saturday retreat, where in our Lojong teachings, we really train our minds to see others as our teachers and to see their better qualities in us. So Dalai Lama was getting interviewed. They asked him, "So, Your Holiness, in the Lojong teachings, teach to see people better than yourselves. So do you do that? Like how does the Dalai Lama see like better qualities in other people? Dalai Lama says, oh, of course. No, when I meet somebody, I'm always trying to, see how much better they are than me. And sometimes I think, wow, they have really good hair. Yeah, he's a clown. So, but pride, when we think about that, it's just a setup for being dissatisfied. Because then I'm constantly comparing. Am I better or less than that? And what happens if somebody doesn't acknowledge, who I am, and doesn't know about those certificates on the wall or what I've accomplished? And we have pride. We have pride in very funny things, not just what we've accomplished. How about pride in what we've overcome? How about pride in our suffering? How about pride in the abuse that we endured when we were young? Somebody challenges that and tells you, that's not such a big deal, get over it. Oh, no, it's a big deal. I really suffered, and let me tell you how much I suffered. And I'm going to actually wear that sense of what I've overcome and my pain and my suffering. And that becomes something I hang on to. Don't take my suffering away. I'm proud of my suffering. It's mine. It's hard to be really peaceful and at ease with that. Pride's a very fascinating piece. So it's an interesting process for me. I'm a parent and a grandparent, and my daughter just got some great grades in college. But I'm not going to say I'm proud of you like that. And even though what the intention is. So Buddhists, they have this other language. We say, well, I rejoice in you. I rejoice in what you've done. I'm really happy for what you've done. I rejoice in your virtues. But it's kind of funky if you walk around the U.S. and somebody tells you something, you go, yeah, I rejoice in that. Yeah, So sometimes we may use the language, but we really know what we're saying, in the sense of that. So I'm always playing with ways of acknowledging that with others. Like, how wonderful that you did that. What a wonderful accomplishment. And but you can see where pride is going to immediately set things apart, and then it creates an affliction. It takes us out of our normal sense of self. There's an exaggeration, certain qualities that are attached to things, and then conflicts that arise. And then we have to defend that pride so often. The next one is ignorance. There's this afflictive mind of ignorance. And I really want to spend the bulk here because, ignorance has multiple levels, and it is, depending on how we look at it in this teaching, it's presented in a couple of different ways. But one of them, ultimately is, this is the root cause of all of our suffering. This is it. If we saw things clearly, I wouldn't be suffering. There's nothing to hang my afflictions on. There's no, if I saw things accurately. And so with ignorance, there's layers of how we see it. And one of them is the idea of just self, who I am, John. And we really, this is the core root. It's not just self, me, but what they talk about self-grasping isn't just grasping a me as being inherently John, and I'm this very solid, non-changing, I'm the same John was here yesterday, and I'm pretty much I'm going to be like this other John tomorrow, that there's this solid, independently existent John that goes day to day. But also this sort of, in this context of self-grasping, is really reifying everybody else. It's a self-grasping of phenomena and qualities and things that exist independent, and they're self-existent from their own side. Very complicated piece that we are going to break down on a greater detail. But that's just not the nature of how things are. And, you don't have to be a Buddhist to realize that. I mean, physics and psychology and philosophy kind of explain this as well. We all know that you're not the same person you were yesterday. But it sure feels like it. Your body's changing, your thoughts are changing. Heck, how many emotions have you had in the last hour? how many thoughts have you had? How many things have I learned and ignored? I mean, it's just, but it feels really solid. And so out of that sense, and I do want to read this quote because this is kind of the key here. Once there is a self, there is an idea of another. So once there's an idea of a self, there's an idea of other. On behalf of self and other, there is attachment and hostility. All of the faults come about in association with these. So this is really the thing. Once I really think about John is now, immediately different than other, and then others, out of my reifying you and me, then I start thinking about what I like and what I don't like, attachment and hostility, and then I am really trying to arrange the rest of the world and making me feel good and trying to avoid the things that don't feel good. And but this is all played out on a level that isn't accurate, and that's the problem. If it was accurate, then we wouldn't have such a problem, And so we want to really pierce and see things more accurately. The ignorance, it's kind of like being in a dim room where you don't see things clearly, you don't see them accurately. I'm just pausing for a moment, because actually the second mental affliction is anger. I jumped to pride, but it's anger. We'll come back to that. So this idea of ignorance is that we spend a lot of time and energy out of misperception just creating nothing but suffering. So we actually, as the quote we used the other week was, we want happiness and joy, but we really crave the source of suffering. We really crave, our desires. We crave these afflictions. And so what we actually wind up doing is focusing all of our time and energy on 8 worldly concerns. And that's just going to create suffering. It's going to be John trying to make myself feel good temporarily, but that same sense of trying to feel good is going to create dissatisfaction that it doesn't last. None of it lasts. And so if I start to understand how things actually work, well, then I got a shot. So if I start to understand that worldly pleasures, worldly things, the nature of the world that we live in is what we call dukkha, unsatisfying. There's nothing here that's going to be ultimately satisfying. There's nothing. And that the nature of being a human being, just by the fact of being a human being, I have all the conditions to get cancer. I have the conditions to get leukemia. I have the conditions to break my leg. I have the conditions to lose, everyone you meet will come and go. All of your relationships will end. Everything that comes together falls apart. That's the nature of phenomena. Yet we, so if we take an objective look at life, it's not that fun. It's just not. But we really try to make it fun. And the interesting thing is, once you can accept it as it truly is, we can really enjoy it more. I mean, there's a lot more peace. There's a lot more ability to participate. You're going to see that our real suffering comes from these 3 marks of existence that we try to avoid. We try to make things permanent that aren't permanent, right? Everything's impermanent, but we really try to make my job secure. We try to make my car last. We try to make my body healthy and strong. We try to make our relationships last. And it's fine to maintain your car, and it's fine to, and I think it's important to make your relationships healthy. But we also need to know that your body can go at any time. Just by being human, I can get cancer. And our mind will say, I shouldn't get cancer. I'm not sure where that rule's written, but somewhere, right, in my mind, it's, I shouldn't get it. It's not fair. And so if we start to understand that the nature of the world that we live in is messy. People break legs. People get sick, people die, relationships come and go, jobs change, recessions happen. Sometimes it rains when you had your party. That this is the nature of samsara, of conditioned existence. This is the nature of it. That's accurate. But our mind will say, well, we shouldn't be stuck in traffic. Right? I mean, that's an insane thought. Why shouldn't you be stuck in traffic? There's traffic. And there's a cause for traffic. Other cars and other people trying to go somewhere. Or road work. But somewhere in my mind, I think, well, it shouldn't be like this. I'm now insane. Right? So you can see where the mind just takes over in these delusional types of thoughts. I shouldn't get cancer. I shouldn't do this. Why not? I mean, hundreds of thousands of other people do. This mind is working at odds and painting a picture that doesn't exist. And so one way is it tries to make things permanent and secure that aren't. It tries to find happiness in things that can't provide it. And it grabs onto a self that doesn't really exist and says, this is John, and John's like this. And John, what's that? John's a Virgo, so, I'm anal, and I need to be on time. And then I start painting a picture of how I am, right? And I never challenge it, because that's how I am. And it's limiting. So out of this ignorance, we try to make things as comfortable as possible. And out of the diluted, the dark room, it appears that if I get the right house, the right car, the right relationship, if I work out and exercise, I'm going to have it made. I'll feel good. How's that working? And even though we could talk about it all day long, and I've talked about this many times in many ways, we can know since kindergarten that happiness is an inside job. It's not that, all that stuff. Where do we spend all of our time when we leave this room? Do we spend almost all of our time trying to feel good in ways that only last a very short period of time? And then get attached to things and try to make them permanent, that house, that thing. We just do it. It's a fascinating thing that we do. And much of our activity is based in reinforcing that, and that becomes the problem. So the affliction of ignorance becomes, I just reinforce again and again a world that doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. And it never is going to provide me with any lasting happiness. There's a couple ways. So there's the way that we don't see ourselves accurately. There's a way that we don't understand sort of the way the world works, right? Karma, right? The sort of ideas about karma or conditions, habits and tendencies that we create. So, for example, in these teachings, they'll say that the real cause for resources, the real cause to have resources in life, is generosity. That if you're generous, you'll have resources. That's the way it works. Now, in our conventional world, it doesn't seem like that, does it? If I give away my stuff, I'm going to be poor. And this, there's nothing in here that says give away all your stuff and be poor. It's saying that if you want inner and outer resources, you want to have a generous mind. You want to share with others, and that's the real cause. And if you do that, you will find that your needs get met. It may not look the way you want. It may not, But in our sort of conventional way of doing things, we think that, if I have the right marketing plan, if I have the right sales pitch, if I use this type of language, and I get the sale, I'm going to make money. And that this money is going to be this resource. So, and so on a conventional level, a lot of things that look like they work don't really match up at all in the ways things actually are. So in this way, you need to investigate it a little differently, and it pairs some investigation. So one of the analogies the teacher used is said, so for example, if you swindle somebody on a car, right? I have a car, transmission's bad. I sell the car, to someone, I don't tell them about the transmission. It looks like I was dishonest and I had a good result. I made a bunch of money off my car, got rid of the car. What this sort of view would also say is, well, if you look at cause and effect, you're going to say that the fact that you got the resources of someone trusting you and giving you money, you'd already created that cause before by virtuous activity. What you're doing now is dishonest, unwholesome, and it's going to create a lack of something later. So before you created conditions that made you sound trustworthy. Now you're creating causes to, even when you're telling the truth, maybe not having someone trust you. Which is an interesting thing, because if you step back and you know, we have our conventional cause and effect. I lied, I got money. But when you step back and you start looking at, well, the more I lie, will I have the inner and outer resources that are going to cultivate the meaning in my life? Will I have those? And you start paying attention to that. And so my own personal experience, 30 years ago, I started living differently. And I've always had my needs met. And I had not ever really focused on how much money I'm going to make or what a job was. It was always, how can I be of benefit? I read a book once. This guy said, you should do life for fun and for free. I wasn't even a Buddhist. He just said, you should do it for fun and for free, show up ethically. It doesn't mean, you're stupid and make poor choices. It means you show up and you help others and your needs get met. And if you let go of attachments, like you need to have a Mercedes, it helps. Right? But by doing that, all my bills have always been paid, and I've always had enough to eat, and I've always had a roof over my head. And there have been times in my life that I needed like $600 by Monday, and it's Friday. And I get a call on Saturday morning, and it's a job, and it pays $650, and they need it done right away. And I can't even count how many times in my life things like that have happened. So to be able to live that way, though, does not work very well based on, John said it would work. Doesn't work like that. It works on starting to pay attention to, do your needs get met? And needs are very different than wants. And can I have these needs met more effectively by showing up and participating in life in a more ethical way, a more beneficial way, thinking about others, and being honest and helpful. And part of that sometimes is to have give people bills so they can pay them and so forth. And so if you can investigate that a little bit, you may start to see that your real needs get met, your real resources. So, for example, we have, I would say, the greatest resource that could be available, in my opinion, is to have access to Dharma teachings that lead to nirvana and an end to suffering. What's more valuable than that? It's not a $12 million home. But the $12 million home is not going to get me enlightened. Not at all. The resources to remove suffering, anxiety, fear, clinging, anger in my life is right here. And somehow I've done things in my life to have access to this resource. And so have you. And so have you. So we really want to start understanding how the world works in terms of resources, and also the sense of a grasping to outer circumstances as though they can provide something that is actually really meaningful or not. Now, instead of having we had that pride, a strong sense of pride or a sense of self. Really, it's interesting because the idea is to have a really strong sense of non-self. Instead of self-esteem, a strong, healthy sense of non-self. An idea that, and this is, I think, for our Western mind, a really challenging deal. Because we work really hard at having good self-esteem. But self-esteem implies there's a self to be esteemed. And in Buddhism, it says that's the core problem. But there's, I was talking to a friend of mine a couple weeks ago about this developmental process. It says, it's really hard for me to have any good, solid sense of non-self until I have a good, healthy sense of being a healthy being, that I have something. If I'm insecure and fearful, it's not a good way for me to enter into the idea of non-self, because I'm going to freak out. and so here in the West, we're really hard on ourselves. We come in with the idea of, even when we learn about kindness and compassion, and I do my, my good practice, then I beat myself up because I didn't meditate long enough, and I got angry at so-and-so, and what a bad person I am. It's just a ridiculous set that we do to ourselves. And so, in order to enter into seeing things more accurately, number one is you got to know that you have your nature, your basic nature, your natural way of being is already healthy and well. It's your Buddha nature. It's already there. And that all these mental afflictions are not you. It's not that sense that I identify with. But we know it's there and it will arise. So the cause of these sort of mental afflictions would say, there's a basis. There's we call them bakchaks in Tibetan, and these kleshas that are in our consciousness. And when a condition arises, I've already got the conditions to say, wow, I really like that, or really, I don't like that. The afflictions can arise based on, I've already got the seeds. I already know I like ice cream if I see it, hot desire. The sense of this self that prevents me and others, and that these things are really self-existent, independent. I reify them. And I really make out that this world is really important, and my life's really important, and I'm really important, and I'm much more important than all of you. Because bottom line is, right, that's how we feel. My life's really important, and I'm going to fight for it. Well, that's a layer of afflicted way of thinking, of delusional thinking, of mind, that is not our basic nature. Your basic nature, this is verifiable, it's not, this is not the religion side. This is the actual science side. If you meditate and you are able to dissolve, our sense consciousness, you will find that the nature of your mind is blissful, luminous, and non-conceptual. That's your basic nature of mind. That's not even enlightenment. That's just your, what we call substrate consciousness or bhavanga, just the nature of mind itself. That's what it is. My mind, in a delusional state, takes whatever I experience and starts labeling it, projecting upon it, and then as soon as I see it, I like it or I don't like that, and then different and others. And the problem is it grabs onto things in really unhealthy ways. It tries to make things permanent that aren't permanent. It tries to find lasting happiness in things that can't provide it. And it says, I am John in a way that doesn't exist. Having said all that, there is this physical being named John that does exist. Right? And there's a John back there that exists. But we're not the same person. And so things do exist. But they exist relationally and interdependently, right? So things are subjective. Our experience of them are subjective, right? The same thing that we could like today, we could not like tomorrow. The same thing that gives us joy today can give us pain tomorrow. The same thing, The classic example everybody uses is your favorite song. Just play that 1,000 times. See how much joy it'll give you, right? It's not in those things. My experience of everything is subjective, and I'm seeing it through my mind, my experience. And so this is really, when we look at this afflictive thing of really seeing myself as real and you as real and ice cream is delicious, I start craving things in a way that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And I start seeing myself as better than others. And then I start seeing jerks and idiots and, people who are just to be admired. It's an interesting experience. So I grew up in Southern California, and I lived quite a time in the media industry, in Burbank, California, and with movie stars and stuff. And it's funny because normal human beings, you and me, we're sitting here in a room. Julia Roberts comes in. Everybody in the room just gets like, whoa, that's Julia Roberts. And everybody's really excited about that. What's that about? What's that about? Julia Roberts is another human being. I don't know her. I've never really met her. But I have an idea about her, right? And then I have an idea, then it goes to a movie star, and then this person's some wonderful person, and people will line up for autographs for this, that they don't really have any knowledge of whether they're this person or that kind of person, or that she's any better than your neighbor who works 2 jobs and takes care of their kids, right? But Julia Roberts walks in the door. It's a whole different experience when your neighbor who works 2 jobs and takes care of the kids walks in the door. See how the mind just jumps on something and takes us totally out of balance. We had Nancy Reagan come through a place I worked, Secret Service and all those people. And, whether you like Nancy Reagan or not, I just noticed the energy, in Secret Service, President, everybody, and, I met so-and-so, and they're taking pictures, and they're not even Republican, right? But I got a picture with Nancy Reagan, and I'll tell somebody about who I was with Nancy Reagan. You see how the mind grabs on to things, attachment, pride, and that experience somehow is going to make you a better human being, or that experience is going to last? Or do we need to keep telling everybody about the time I met Julia Roberts? And what about your neighbor who works 2 jobs and takes care of 3 kids? Who you actually do know. Right? So when we talk about afflictions, we got to notice how this sets up a whole emotional base that is ripe for desire, for depression, for anger, for resentment. Anger is one of the afflictions I haven't really covered. For pride, and how these things always take us out of a balance that's inner peace and tranquil, our natural state. Our natural state is actually quite blissful and healthy and well. But even if I know I'm going to do something this weekend, let's say I'm going on the river. Laura's was talking about going to the river. You know what happens? Well, I can't wait till Saturday. I'm looking to Saturday. I can't be here now. I'm looking to Saturday. Because Saturday is going to be really good. And then Saturday might come. It might be a great trip. Or might not happen. Car breaks down. Somebody doesn't show up. Something else comes up. You got to do a job. And we can't shift into the new reality, right? Because we're really attached to, I'm going to go rafting. So we want to really start to see even good things that are going to happen, the vacation, whatever, and then our expectations about that vacation. If we can bring a mind that starts to look at the things in your life that we feel good about, things that we're proud of, how about things that make us angry? Anger is another mental affliction. Is anger ever I'm gonna present this a different way. I'm going to propose that we have this life, right? We have this incredible life. It's human experience. And is there anything more important in it than using it with wisdom, right? Using it in a way that is more accurate and clear, that doesn't waste your time on things that create suffering, right? And in a way that cultivates in your own life a meaningful life, a sense of well-being, a sense of purpose. Is there anything more important? And am I willing to throw away a sense of purpose and clarity and wisdom and a long-term benefit of no suffering to feel good for a little bit? I'm going to say we do it all the time. But let's take all these teachings and put it in a sense of, if every day and every activity that I participate in, I can ask the question, in what way will this be most beneficial? In what way can I cultivate wisdom? How can I cultivate a way of seeing the world accurately? And in what am I doing to see the world more accurately? And by accurately, I'm really thinking about how things operate and in a way that is not going to create a lot more pain in my life. And what am I doing that's beneficial, that's going to create the conditions to grow? So another way of putting that is merit and wisdom. Virtuous activity and wisdom. And it's a pretty simple, I like to take all this and just simplify and say, anything that happens in my life, can ask myself, will this cultivate merit or will it cultivate wisdom? When you get angry, will that cultivate merit or wisdom? Can it do that? Is getting angry an opportunity to cultivate merit or wisdom? And I think that's a really interesting thing to ask. Modern Western psychology and most of people in the West will say that anger is a normal human emotion and it serves a purpose and it's beneficial. So that's the line on it. And a Buddhist line is no. It's an affliction. It's a mental affliction. And anger arises only in dependence upon a sense of self that doesn't exist. And the theme, a Western psychology theme with anger is, I am being thwarted from what I want. Something is obstructing me from what I want or how I think it should be in the view. So if I'm angry, so in Western stuff, and I've been on, I was once on a whole interfaith council, where we have discussion from different viewpoints of, different religions. And they brought up anger. And I was the only one there that said, I don't think anger is beneficial. And everybody got angry about that. Oh, and they got really angry about it. They really, people in the audience even got angry about that and said how, that anger moves people to, really stand up against like the genocide because you get angry about it and you do something about it and so forth. And which is a valid point, right? That anger can be used. And I think in our life, how many times have you gotten angry and it actually moved you to do something healthy? It does happen. I actually can pull up sometimes where I finally got fed up enough that I dealt with a problem I didn't want to deal with. And it moved me to do something healthy. So there's two different questions. Can anger move you to do something healthy? And I'd say sure, it can. Not often. Generally, when you're in anger, it's hard to make healthy choices. After the anger subsides, we have the potential for doing healthy things. But the question here is, how about the affliction itself, the anger itself? I mean, is it an affliction? Does it take us out of our ability to make healthy choices? And in Buddhism says it totally takes you out of that. It creates nothing but harmful, unwholesome imprints in our consciousness and conditions that just don't ripen for anything healthy in the future. So my point to being to someone who said, if you didn't get angry, it wouldn't have stopped, in the Holocaust, World War II, or whatever, is, well, my point was, what is it that you could do in anger that you couldn't do out of compassion? Having compassion for the people being killed in the Holocaust, I would be moved to step up and defend them, but not out of anger, out of a sense of compassion, and out of a sense of compassion knowing that even the people inflicting the harm are coming from their deluded view, and some of them, we have to stand up against them and do what we need to do, but not because they're bad people. They're just other human beings that are hurting other human beings. And out of compassion and seeing this, what's the healthiest thing to do? That couldn't you maybe operate a little more with a little more precision, a little more clarity out of compassion than out of anger? Because when we're in anger, and that's a bad, evil person, and then out of rage we do things, versus understanding that there's people harming people. They're human. And what can I do to stop it? If you come from that sense of compassion, of interrelationship, and even being able to identify with the people creating the harm, we might be more skillful with how we interact with them, and how we set boundaries, and how we use force. So even breaking up a fight, I've had a great opportunity to do that as a school teacher and a counselor. Do we want to punish someone so they feel bad, or do we want to intervene in a way that helps them change? Or do we want to intervene in a way that prevents harm in the long term? You send someone to jail because they're a bad person, just lock them up, throw the key away? Or how about put them in jail because they're not safe to be on the streets right now, and give them the opportunity to heal and be well? Out of compassion, you might do that. Out of anger, you could say, drunk driving, they killed somebody, lock them up forever. Out of compassion, you can understand a lot of people drink. Probably some people in this room drank. And some of us maybe even drunk and drive. And that any of us could have been that person. And maybe put that person in prison for a little while, provide them some opportunity to learn. And how do you think they feel about that? And does it mean they'll never be a good person or ever do a good thing? So what we're inviting people to look at is how we see the world more accurately. And understanding that I'm not a good person or a bad person, and neither are you. We're just human. And every one of us has done healthy things, and we've also done unhealthy things. We're all liars, and we're all truthers. That's one of my favorite lines. We've all done things that we feel good about. We've all done helpful things. We've all done hurtful things. But that self-beating thing that says, I am these things I did, is not accurate. And it prevents us from seeing the world accurately, and it prevents us from being all that we can be in a more realistic way. It's a strong sense of self that says, I'm not good at this, I am good at this, I'm this kind of person, I'm that kind of person. It's this sense of self and how others are a certain way, Julia Roberts, or your neighbor, or your brother, or that person who did you wrong 10 years ago. We always see them like that frozen thing in time. Out of this ignorance, this sense of seeing ourselves in a particular way, we create a whole lot of judgments and values which trigger emotions and feelings that just don't fit with the way things really are in the world. So here we want to start to notice, what's the healthiest way to spend my time? I mean, that's what it comes down to. We have X amount of time in a day. And we are here now for an hour and a half to really take a moment to crack the door open and ask, what's meaningful? What's healthy? How do I want to live my life? Here's some teachings that say, hey, all of these mental afflictions are unnecessary. Well, is that true? And I'll tell you what, if it's true, I'm up for getting rid of them. I have got no attachment to anger, resentment, jealousy, frustration, resentment, jealousy. I just don't. And is there a way that we can live differently, more accurately, that eliminates them? So we want to investigate that. In order to investigate that, we have to notice what they are. And we have to see afflictions as afflictions. We cannot see desire, attachment type desire, as a wonderful thing. Because if you do, you're not going to want to change it. So the point that was made a couple weeks ago, again, because whenever we use the word attachment, I want to distinguish the difference between a good motivation and attachment. Attachment's diluted and really has an expectation that this thing's going to make me feel a certain way in some way that's going to happen. Whereas you can have a desire to help someone. You can have a desire to be of benefit. You can have a desire to make your garden nice without an attachment to it. It just needs to be grounded in reality. To know that the garden may or may not turn out the way you want. That when you try to help someone, they may or may not want your help. That it may not turn out the way we want. Attachment is really a diluted way of grabbing onto something. It needs to be this way. And if it's this way, it'll be really good. Or it could be an attachment to, if this happens, it'll be terrible. Aversion. That's another form of attachment. And start paying attention to, am I really grabbing onto things out there? Am I spending all of my hours in a day trying to accumulate a lot of pleasurable experiences and then calling that happiness? And does that work for you? Or does that create more attachment? Does it create more sense of dissatisfaction? So these afflictions, I'm just going to list them real quick. Attachment, anger, pride, ignorance. We get into the wrong view, and there's doubt. Doubt's the other one, this diluted sense of doubt, which is not the same as a discerning, questioning mind. They are the six primary that we want to start paying attention to in our life. And then we'll unpack and we'll actually see how our suffering arises, the real cause. So we're going to move into the 12 links of dependent origination in these teachings. So today, though, I really wanted us to take a moment to look at how we see ourselves and others, and remember that you're changing, they're changing, that the world we live in is subjective, relational, and our pride is not necessarily a healthy thing. Our anger is certainly not a healthy thing. And start paying attention to, I invite you this week to ask yourself during the week, in anything that you do, will this cultivate merit or wisdom? And I really think that's a great measuring stick. Whatever arises, somebody flattens my tires. How do I respond in a way that will cultivate merit and wisdom? Somebody gives me some good news. How do I respond in a way that cultivates merit and wisdom? I notice anger arising. Well, how do I deal with that in a way that cultivates merit and wisdom? Everything in this life that we have, is there anything more important than living it with purpose in a way that's accurate to its highest potentials, merit and wisdom. And I think if we can bring those two ideas, and by merit, merit's this Buddhist idea, but virtuous, in a way that's purposeful to you, in a way that cultivates conditions that you would like, in a way that is in alignment with your values, that's ethical, merit, good things, beneficial, purposeful. And with wisdom that's actually accurate, that sees things clearly. And so I invite you this week to take some time. We had our hour and a half. And we're going to venture out into not the real world. We're going to venture out into, as Alan Wells calls it, what's the obsessive, compulsive, delusional world out there. But that we can crack the door, that we can take a little time every day to remember what's important for you, to remember that all these thoughts, feelings, and emotions are not you. They're temporary. And you can actually establish the ability to choose one thought over another. And to allow a feeling to come and go without saying, that's me. It's something I need to work on. Maybe it'll come and go. Maybe your nature is enlightened. And check. And check. The idea is to investigate, to be open to the question. All right, I went a little bit over. I got a little enthusiastic. So we'll do our dedication. We did spend some time here cultivating merit and wisdom, and it's nice to dedicate this for the benefit of all beings so they can all be free of suffering, that we're not just here to make our little center of the universe John happy, that we're really here so that you're making the highest use of your life for the benefit of all beings, that everything we do has an impact on everything else, which again is part of that accurate sense. So let's take a moment to do our dedication. Let us dedicate the virtue and wisdom we have accumulated, both individually and collectively, both here today and throughout our lives. Let us dedicate this for the benefit of all beings. May all beings be free of suffering and find lasting happiness. And may we be able to use the virtue and wisdom accumulated here today and throughout our lives to purify our own minds, to cultivate the wisdom of enlightenment so that we can truly be of benefit to all beings and lead them to liberation. Well, I thank you all so much, and always a joy and an honor, and as always, try to stay out of trouble. And we'll see you next week. And those of you that are interested in volunteering, helping out with the monks, we'll have a short meeting right afterwards. So, all right, be well. And be well to you online. Thank you.